Pink Lake. Most people see a photo of Lake Hillier and immediately assume it's been edited. The water is pink, not kind of pinkish or faintly tinted, genuinely bubblegum hot pink, and it stays that way no matter what time of day you look at it or what container you pour it into. Scientists have been studying this lake for over 100 years and still don't have a completely clean explanation. The best current theory points to a combination of salt-tolerant algae, bacteria, and high salt content all reacting together to produce that color. But there are other salty pink lakes in the world, and none of them look quite like this. Hillier is vivid in a way that feels out of place on a normal planet. It sits right next to the Southern Ocean, so you get this strip of deep blue ocean on one side and completely unnatural pink on the other, with no fading or blending at the edges. The water is safe to swim in, which surprises most people, but because the island is a nature reserve, access is extremely limited, so most people will only ever see it from a plane or drone shot. Which might be the best way anyway, because from above the contrast is so extreme it barely looks real. Volcano City. Aogashima is a tiny volcanic island about 350 kilometers south of Tokyo, and roughly 200 people live there. Inside a volcano. Not near one. Inside one. The island itself is the outer rim of an ancient collapsed volcano, and then right in the middle of that there's a second, smaller, newer volcano growing up from the floor. So people built their homes and farms and roads in the space between them. The last time Aogashima erupted was in the 1780s, and it basically destroyed everything. Most of the island's population was wiped out. The people who survived evacuated to a nearby island, and it took almost 50 years before anyone moved back. And they did move back. They built it all again, right in the same spot. Getting there is genuinely difficult. There's a small helipad and a helicopter service that runs when weather allows, and a ferry that gets canceled about 50 days a year. The island has a school, a sake brewery that uses volcanic heat to ferment the rice, and hot springs. A community of people who apparently decided that living inside a double volcano is just fine. And for 200 years, nothing bad has happened. So far. The burning crater. In the middle of the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan, there is a crater about 70 meters wide that has been on fire continuously since 1971. It has not gone out once. Over 50 years of burning in the middle of a desert, and nobody has ever put it out. The story behind it is that Soviet engineers were drilling for natural gas, the ground collapsed under their equipment, and a large pocket of gas started leaking out. The decision was made to light it on fire to burn off the gas quickly and safely before it spread. The estimate at the time was that it would burn for a few weeks. That was in 1971. The local name for it is Darvaza Gas Crater, but pretty much everyone calls it the door to hell, because when you look at it at night, that's genuinely what it looks like. This wide glowing pit in the middle of flat desert, with flames coming out of every crack and edge, and the heat hits you from a surprising distance away. Explorer George Kourounis became the first person to actually climb down into it in 2013. He wore a special heat-resistant suit and was lowered in on a rope, and he found living microbes at the bottom, which raised a whole new set of questions about what exactly can survive in that environment. The Turkmenistan government has periodically talked about putting it out because they'd rather sell the gas than burn it. So far, nothing has changed. The fire is still going. Blood Falls. There is a waterfall in Antarctica that runs red. Not orange or rust-colored. Red, like blood, flowing out of a glacier and pooling into a frozen lake at the bottom. Researchers first spotted it in 1911, and for decades assumed it was caused by red algae. That turned out to be wrong. What's actually happening is far more interesting. About 1.5 million years ago, a body of salt water got trapped underneath Taylor Glacier. Over time, that water became extremely salty and very iron-rich, completely cut off from sunlight and oxygen. Microbes living in that water had to adapt to survive in total darkness, with almost no energy and extremely cold temperatures. They found a way. When the water eventually pushes up through cracks in the glacier and hits open air, the iron in it reacts with oxygen and turns red. The same way rust forms, so the blood red color is basically the water rusting in real time as it hits the surface. The really striking part is what this means for science beyond Antarctica. If microbes can survive for over 1 million years in a completely dark, oxygen-free, extremely cold, and salty environment underneath a glacier, then the argument for life existing beneath the ice shells of places like Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, becomes a lot stronger. Blood Falls gets referenced in those conversations regularly. The place looks like a wound in the ice and turns out to be one of the more important pieces of evidence we have that life can exist in conditions we previously assumed were impossible. The bottomless blue hole. The Great Blue Hole off the coast of Belize is a circle of dark blue ocean water surrounded by bright turquoise shallow reef, and it is almost perfectly round. From above it looks like someone punched a hole in the ocean floor. The opening is about 300 meters across and it drops straight down to 125 meters deep. Jacques Cousteau declared it one of the best diving sites in the world in 1971, which put it on the map for a lot of people. The reason it exists is that during the last ice age, when sea levels were much lower, this was a dry limestone cave system. Over thousands of years, the roof of the cave collapsed, and when sea levels rose after the ice age, the whole thing flooded. So what you're diving into is essentially a drowned cave. The stalactites on the walls are still there at around 40 meters down, hanging sideways because when they formed, the orientation of the space was completely different. Below about 100 meters, the water has no oxygen in it at all, which means almost nothing lives down there. In 2018, a team went all the way to the bottom and found a flat, featureless layer of sediment and some plastic waste. The plastic confirmed the layer at the bottom is completely still. No currents, no movement. Things that sink to the bottom of the Great Blue Hole just stay there forever. The Glass Lake. Hanging Lake in Colorado looks like it shouldn't exist. There's a lake sitting on the edge of a cliff partway up a canyon wall, completely full, and the water is this vivid blue-green color that looks filtered even in photos taken on ordinary phones. Fallen trees sit completely submerged in it, and you can see every branch and log perfectly through the water because it's so clear. The lake formed through a geological fault. Most lakes form in low spots where water collects. This one formed when part of the canyon floor dropped away, leaving a flat section of rock at a higher elevation that basically became a natural bowl. Water fed by small waterfalls keeps it consistently full. The color comes from calcium carbonate deposits on the lake bed, which reflect light in a specific way that produces that turquoise effect. The same mineral builds up on the fallen logs and on the rocks along the edge, slowly coating everything in white over time. For years, it was a fairly quiet trail. Then it went viral on social media around 2017, and suddenly the path was getting thousands of visitors a week. The trail is short, just a mile and a half, but it ends at a lake only about an acre in size. So many people were walking around the edges and touching everything that Colorado parks had to cap daily visitors at 615 and require advance reservations. The lake that most people discover because of a photo is now one of the harder ones to get a permit to visit. The vertical drop. Mount Thor in Baffin Island, Canada, has the longest purely vertical drop of any cliff on Earth. The west face drops 1,250 meters straight down and actually overhangs slightly, meaning the cliff leans out over you as you look up at it. If you dropped a rock from the top, it would fall for about 15 seconds before hitting anything. To put the height in context, the cliff is taller than 3 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. And because it's in the Canadian Arctic, getting there involves flying into a remote area of Aogashima National Park and then hiking several days through tundra with no roads anywhere near it. The first full ascent was completed in 1985 by a team that spent 32 days on the face, sleeping in small hanging tents pegged into the rock, dangling over nothing for over a month. The cliff is also a destination for base jumpers, who travel from around the world specifically to leap off it, which seems like a completely reasonable response to a 1,250-meter vertical drop. The Alien Cave. Movile Cave in Romania was sealed off from the surface for about 5.5 million years. When workers accidentally broke through to it in 1986 while doing construction surveys, scientists found an entire functioning ecosystem inside that had developed in complete isolation for millions of years. The cave has no sunlight, no connection to the surface world, and yet 48 species were discovered in it, of which 33 existed nowhere else on Earth. The base of the food chain in there isn't plants or sunlight. The cave has pockets of air with very high carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide levels that would be harmful to humans, and special bacteria feed on those gases instead of sunlight, forming a kind of floating mat on the water inside the cave. Everything else in the cave eats those bacteria or eats something that eats them. Spiders, leeches, water scorpions, centipedes, all of them pale and eyeless because they'd been evolving in the dark for millions of generations with no reason to keep pigment or functioning eyes. Access to the cave is extremely restricted. Fewer than 100 people have ever been inside it, and most visits are scientific. To get in, you climb down a narrow shaft and pass through an airlock-style entry to prevent contamination. The fear isn't just that humans will damage the cave. It's that microbes from the surface introduced into an ecosystem that never encountered them could wipe out species that survived 5 million years of isolation. The cave is one of the strongest arguments that life can persist and adapt in almost any condition, as long as there's some form of energy to work with. The Polka Dot Lake. Spotted Lake in British Columbia looks completely different depending on what time of year you see it. During the wetter months, it looks like a regular shallow lake. Then summer arrives, most of the water evaporates, and what's left behind is a series of circular mineral pools arranged across the lake bed, each one a slightly different color: pale green, yellow, blue, white, sitting in a cracked mineral crust. From the road, it looks like something from a different planet. The colors come from the fact that the lake has an unusually high concentration of different minerals: magnesium sulfate, calcium, and sodium sulfate among them. As the water evaporates in summer, those minerals concentrate in the remaining pools, and each one ends up with a different dominant mineral, which produces a different color. The pattern shifts a bit year to year depending on rainfall and exactly how much water evaporates, so the spots are never quite identical from one summer to the next. The Okanagan Nation has considered this lake sacred for a long time and used the mineral-rich mud for various purposes. In 2001, the land was officially returned to the Okanagan Nation after years of effort. The lake sits right alongside a highway and is completely visible from the road, but there's a fence around the perimeter, and entry requires permission. Most people stop at the roadside, take their photo, and keep driving. The lake doesn't need you to walk on it to be impressive. The underwater forest. Lake Kandy in Kazakhstan has trees growing out of it. Not around it. Out of it. The trunks rise straight up from below the surface and stick out above the water, stripped bare, white and gray, in rows. Under the water, the roots are still attached to the submerged ground and the branches are completely intact down there in the cold, clear water. The whole forest is just sitting underwater like nothing happened. What actually happened was an earthquake in 1911 that triggered a massive landslide. The debris blocked a natural gorge and water from rain, and snowmelt gradually filled the valley behind it. The trees that were already growing there didn't fall, they just got covered. And because the lake sits at about 2,000 meters elevation in the Tian Shan Mountains, the water stays extremely cold most of the year, cold enough to preserve the submerged wood for over a century without it rotting much. In winter, the lake freezes over and the trunks stick up through the ice. In summer, divers go down to explore the submerged sections. The water is cold and clear enough that visibility is very good, and you can swim between the trees looking up through branches at the surface. Getting there involves a mountain drive and a hike on a rough road, but people keep going because a drowned forest with its trees still standing after 110 years is not something you come across very often. The stone eggs. On Kokohi Beach on the south coast of New Zealand, there are large, almost perfectly round boulders sitting directly on the beach. Not a few of them. Dozens. Some are the size of a basketball, some are close to 2 meters across, and most of them are very close to spherical. They look like eggs, or cannonballs, or like something placed them there deliberately. The local Maori name for the beach actually refers to a place to eat mullet, but the boulders feature in traditional Maori stories as the remains of food baskets and gourds washed ashore from an ancestral canoe. The scientific explanation is that they formed inside marine sediment on the seafloor about 60 million years ago. A small particle, often a fossil or a shell fragment, attracted calcium carbonate, which slowly built up around it in concentric layers over millions of years, the same way a pearl forms but on a much larger, longer scale. The result is a near-perfect sphere of cemented sediment. As the sea cliffs behind the beach erode, more boulders are revealed and roll down onto the beach. The ones already on the beach get slowly worn by waves, and some have cracked open to reveal a crystalline interior. Tourists started taking pieces of the boulders as souvenirs, which prompted the site to become protected. At low tide, you can walk right up to them and put your hand on a stone that started forming before dinosaurs were wiped out. And it genuinely just looks like a smooth gray ball sitting on the sand. The living caves! The marble caves are inside a lake in Patagonia called General Carrera, which sits on the border between Chile and Argentina. The caves formed in a peninsula of solid marble that juts into the lake, and over thousands of years the waves have carved tunnels, chambers, and archways directly into the marble. But the thing that makes the caves genuinely hard to believe in photos is the color of the water inside them. The lake is fed by glacier meltwater, which carries very fine rock particles in it. Those particles give the water this deep turquoise blue color that varies slightly depending on the season and water levels. When that colored water sits inside the marble chambers, it reflects off the ceiling and the walls, and the whole interior of the cave glows. The blue light bounces around the marble, and the marble itself has swirling gray and white patterns in it, so the entire space looks like something a set designer built rather than something water-made over a few thousand years. You can only reach the caves by boat. The nearest town is Cochrane on the Chilean side and Puerto Rio Tranquilo, which is a small village that has basically built its whole economy around ferrying tourists out to the caves. The boat trips are short, and you go inside the caves by sitting in a small boat and floating through the entrance. You don't walk in them. You float through them and look up. The best time to go is between October and February, when the light conditions and water levels produce the most intense color inside the caves. Outside of that window, the effect is still there, just less dramatic, which still puts it well ahead of most things you'll see in your life.